Chapter 1. The World of Ur. Long before his name would be spoken in prayer, long before his descendants would be counted like stars, there was a man living quietly in the great city of Ur. Ur stood proud on the flat plains of Mesopotamia, a city shaped by human hands and human ambition. Its walls were strong, its streets busy, its markets loud with voices calling out prices and promises. Merchants traveled from distant lands, bringing copper, wool, and finely carved stones. Priests moved through temple courtyards heavy with incense. The people of Ur believed they lived at the center of the world, and in many ways, they did. At the heart of the city rose the great ziggurat, a towering step temple reaching toward the sky. It was dedicated to Nana, the moon god, whose cycles governed festivals, harvests, and the rhythms of life. By night, the moonlight washed over the stone structure, and by day, its shadow stretched long across the city, a constant reminder of divine presence, or so the people believed. Gods were everywhere in Ur. They were carved into stone, molded from clay, painted onto walls. Every household had its idols. Every street corner had its shrine. The gods were fed, clothed, praised, feared, and bargained with. The people did not question whether the gods existed. They questioned only whether they had been pleased. Into this world, Abram was born. He was the son of Terah, a man of standing, a maker and seller of idols. Terah's hands shaped the forms people prayed to. His craft provided well for his family. Abram grew up surrounded by gods made by human hands, watching as people bowed before what had been carved, polished, and sold. From the outside, Abram's life followed the expected path. He married Sarai, a woman of quiet strength and striking beauty. They built a household, gathered servants, tended flocks, and lived with a sense of stability that many envied. Ur was prosperous. It was safe. It was known. Yet beneath the certainty of daily routines, something stirred. Abram was not a priest. He was not a philosopher. Scripture tells us little of his early thoughts, yet silence often hides depth. In a city filled with voices proclaiming divine will, Abram listened differently. He watched the rituals, the sacrifices, the careful measurements meant to appease unseen powers, and he wondered. The gods of Ur demanded much and promised little. They were said to be powerful, yet they needed to be carried. They were feared, yet they could be broken. Abram had seen idols fall and shatter on stone floors, their faces cracked, their mouths forever silent. If the gods were truly gods, why did they need human hands to lift them? Sarai, too, carried a quiet ache. Years passed, and no child came. In a culture where lineage meant survival and blessing, her barrenness was a silent sorrow. The gods were prayed to. Offerings were made. Still, the emptiness remained. At night, Abram would sometimes leave the lamplit rooms of his home and walk beyond the noise of the city. Past the walls, past the voices, past the smoke of incense, he would look up. The sky over Ur was vast. Without the city's glow, the stars revealed themselves in overwhelming number. They did not flicker like torches or fade like incense smoke. They endured. Night after night, season after season, they followed paths no human hand could alter. Abram felt small beneath them and strangely seen. There was order in the heavens that no temple could contain. No priest commanded it. No idol represented it fully. The stars obeyed something older, something deeper, something Abram could not yet name. He did not know then that he was being watched. Not by the moon god of Ur, nor by the countless idols lining the streets, but by the one who had made the stars themselves. The one who had shaped not only clay and stone, but breath and time and promise. Abram's life, for now, remained ordinary. He tended flocks. He managed servants. He honored his father. He lived as men lived in Ur. Yet the quiet tension grew, a sense that the world he knew was not the whole story. God often begins this way. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with restlessness. With questions that refuse to fade. With a longing that does not yet have words. Ur was a city built on certainty. Its gods had names, its rituals had rules, its future seemed assured. Abram stood within it, rooted and respected, lacking nothing the world could offer, except the one thing he did not yet know he was searching for. The voice that would one day call him had not yet spoken aloud, but the silence was already listening. And the journey of faith, one that would reshape history, was quietly, patiently beginning. Chapter 2. The first call. The silence did not last forever. Abram did not know the moment it began. There was no sudden light, no trembling ground, no voice that shattered the night. Instead, it came as quietly as dawn, almost unnoticed at first, an awareness that grew impossible to ignore. He had known many voices in his life. The calls of merchants in the streets of Ur, the prayers murmured in temples, the instructions of his father, the concerns of servants, the gentle counsel of Sarai. All of them carried the weight of human intention. This was different. It did not compete with the noise of the world. It did not demand attention. It waited. Abram felt it in stillness, in moments when the city slept and even the idols stood in shadow. It was not shaped by fear or bargaining. It did not ask for offerings. It did not speak of appeasement or punishment. It simply was. When the voice came, it did not introduce itself. It did not explain. It did not argue. It spoke with a certainty that made explanation unnecessary. Go. The word carried more weight than a command. It was an invitation wrapped in authority, a direction without a map, a future without details. Go from your country, from your people, and from your father's household, to the land I will show you. Abram stood still, as though the world itself had paused to listen. Ur was everything he had ever known. Its streets held his memories. Its walls had sheltered his youth. His father's house had shaped his identity. To leave was not merely to travel. It was to unmake the foundations of a life. The voice did not soften the cost. It did not promise ease, safety, or familiarity. It offered no name for the destination. Only trust. I will make you into a great nation. The voice continued, calm and unyielding. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Abram had no children. Sarai's womb remained silent. Nations were built on bloodlines and heirs, not hopes spoken into emptiness. The promise stood in stark contrast to reality. Yet the voice did not hesitate. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. It was too large to grasp all at once, too vast for reason to tame. Abram did not fall to the ground. He did not shout or run. Faith does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes faith listens. Abram's heart pounded, not with fear alone, but with recognition. The voice spoke as though it knew him, as though it had been waiting long before Abram had ever looked at the stars. This was no god fashioned by Terah's hands, no deity bound to a temple or fed by ritual. This voice required no image, no shrine, no defense. It spoke as one who already owned the earth Abram stood upon. Days passed, and the voice did not fade. It did not contradict itself. It did not bargain. It remained, steady, unwavering, patient. Abram wrestled in silence. He weighed the certainty of Ur against the uncertainty of promise. He measured comfort against calling. He considered his age, his responsibilities, his father's expectations. Every practical voice urged him to stay. But the call did not argue with practicality. It simply remained true. Sarai listened as Abram spoke of what he had heard. She did not laugh. She did not dismiss him. She knew the cost of waiting. She understood what it meant to live with emptiness and still choose hope. Together, they faced the impossible. Faith, Abram would learn, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward while fear remains. At last, the decision settled, not as excitement, but as resolve. Abram would go, not because he understood, but because the voice had proven trustworthy before it had proven itself explainable. The city of Ur continued its rituals, unaware that one man's obedience was about to alter the course of history. The gods of stone remained where they were placed, unable to follow. But the God who had called Abram did not dwell in temples. He walked with those who listened. And with that first step away from certainty, the journey of promise began, not with thunder, but with obedience. Chapter 3. Leaving everything behind. Leaving is rarely a single moment. It is a series of quiet endings, stitched together by resolve. For Abram, obedience did not unfold in a rush of emotion. It took shape slowly, through days filled with ordinary tasks that now carried unfamiliar weight. The voice had spoken. The decision had settled. Yet the world around him remained unchanged. Streets still crowded, prayers still whispered, idols still polished and praised. Ur did not know it was being left behind. Abram walked its streets with new eyes. Every corner held memory. Every sound seemed sharper, as though the city itself were pressing into him, reminding him of what he would lose. The marketplace where agreements had been made and fortunes exchanged. The wells that had quenched thirst through long summers. The walls that had promised safety against an uncertain world. This place had shaped him. His father's house stood strong, built on years of labor and reputation. Terah's workshop still smelled of clay and oil, stone dust clinging to the air. Half-formed idols rested against the walls, gods waiting to be completed, named, and sold. Abram watched his father's hands move with practiced ease, shaping what others would bow before. Soon, Abram would no longer watch. Explaining the decision was harder than making it. Terah listened, his face lined with confusion more than anger. Leaving Ur was not unheard of. People traveled, traded, settled elsewhere. But this was different. Abram was not pursuing opportunity. He was answering something unseen. To leave without a destination was folly. To abandon security for promise was madness. Yet Abram did not argue. Faith, he was learning, does not always persuade. Sometimes it simply proceeds. Sarai stood beside him through it all. She moved through the household, preparing quietly, her expression thoughtful, steady. She understood what it meant to carry loss without guarantees. Years of waiting had taught her how to live with unanswered questions. If God had spoken, she would walk. Servants were gathered. Tents were folded. Supplies were counted and recounted. Flocks were prepared for movement. Each practical task made the decision more real. Each item packed was an acknowledgement that what lay ahead could not be undone. The morning of departure came without ceremony. No crowd gathered. No priest pronounced blessing. No god of Ur offered protection for the road. Abram stepped beyond the threshold of his home and did not look back right away, leaving his hardest at the door. When he did turn, the city stood as it always had, unchanged, enduring, confident. Ur would continue without him. Its gods would still be fed. Its temples would still cast long shadows. Life would go on, uninterrupted. Abram felt the finality settle in his chest. He was no longer a man of Ur. The road stretched before them, winding away from certainty into open land. Dust rose beneath the feet of animals and people alike. The pace was slow, deliberate. Each step carried them farther from what was known and closer to what was promised, but unseen. The land did not welcome them with signs or reassurance. The sky remained silent. The earth offered no explanation. Faith did not change the terrain. Days turned into weeks. The rhythms of travel replaced the rhythms of city life. Nights were colder, silence deeper, stars brighter. Abram often lay awake, listening, not for another command, but for confirmation. The voice did not repeat itself. It did not need to. What Abram discovered was that obedience does not erase doubt. It carries it. He wondered if he had misunderstood, if age had made him reckless, if longing had shaped the voice he thought he had heard. Yet every morning, when he rose and continued forward, the doubt lost its power. God had not promised answers. He had promised presence. Sarai watched the land change as they moved farther from the familiar. Hills replaced plains. New peoples appeared, strangers with unfamiliar customs, unfamiliar gods. Abram felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. Every decision now mattered. Every misstep carried consequence. Yet something else grew as well. Freedom. For the first time, Abram's identity was not anchored to place, reputation, or inheritance. He was defined by response, by movement, by trust. God was not behind him, dwelling in the city he had left. God was not ahead of him, waiting only at the destination. God walked with him, step by step, day by day, unseen but unwavering. This was the cost of the call, to leave what could be named, for what could only be trusted. And though Abram did not yet know it, every step away from Ur was also a step toward becoming someone new, not just a traveler, but the beginning of a people. The journey had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 4. A land not yet given. The land did not announce itself. Abram had imagined, at times, that there might be a moment when everything became clear, when the ground beneath his feet would feel different, when the air itself would confirm that he had arrived. But days passed, then weeks, and the landscape unfolded without explanation. Hills rose and fell, valleys opened and closed. Rivers crossed their path, offering water and reflection, then disappeared behind them. The land was wide, ancient, and already inhabited. It did not wait for Abram. It did not bend to his expectations. This, too, was part of the promise. They entered Canaan quietly, without banners or proclamation. No voice declared ownership. No boundary lines were drawn. Abram walked the soil as a traveler, not as a ruler. He pitched his tents where space allowed and moved on when it did not. The land of promise felt, at first, like any other land. Abram felt the weight of that contradiction settle within him. God had spoken of inheritance, yet Abram owned nothing. Not a field, not a well, not even the ground where he slept. Each night, the earth beneath his tent belonged to someone else by custom, by history, by force. Faith does not always grant possession. Sometimes it grants patience. The people of the land watched him carefully. They were not hostile, but they were wary. A foreign household with flocks and servants was not easily ignored. Abram sensed their eyes as he moved through their territory, felt the unspoken question lingering in the air. Who are you? And how long will you stay? Abram did not have answers that satisfied them, or himself. At Shechem, near the great tree of Moreh, Abram paused longer than usual. The place carried an ancient stillness, as though it had witnessed generations come and go without concern. It was there, in that quiet space between movement and rest, that the voice came again. This land, God said, I will give to your offspring. Not to you, to your offspring. The promise was both reassurance and burden. Abram was given vision without fulfillment, inheritance without possession. He stood in the land that would one day belong to his descendants, knowing he would walk it only as a guest. Abram built an altar there, not grand, not ornate. Stones gathered by hand, stacked with care. It was not meant to impress anyone who passed by. It was an act of memory, a way of marking the moment. God had spoken again. Altars, Abram learned, were not claims of ownership. They were acknowledgments of presence. From Shechem, Abram moved on, traveling between Bethel and Ai. He pitched his tent between two places, belonging fully to neither. The geography mirrored his life, always between what was promised and what was experienced. There, Abram built another altar. He did not build cities. He did not establish borders. He built reminders. The days settled into a rhythm shaped by movement and waiting. Abram learned the land not as a master, but as a listener. He noticed the way shadows lengthened at dusk, the way winds shifted with the seasons, the way silence pressed close in the open spaces. At night, beneath unfamiliar stars, Abram returned to the same questions. How long? How? Why this way? God did not answer them. Instead, he remained. Faith, Abram was discovering, was not strengthened by arrival, but by endurance. Each day, without fulfillment, refined obedience. Each night, without certainty, deepened trust. Sarai watched the land with her own quiet ache. The promise spoke of descendants, yet her body still carried emptiness. She felt the tension between divine words and human reality more keenly than anyone. Still, she stayed. Still, she walked. Still, she chose not to turn back. The land was beautiful, but beauty did not remove longing. Abram's flocks grazed where they could. His servants adjusted to life without permanence. Everyone learned to live lightly, knowing nothing was guaranteed to last. Tents could be folded. Altars could be left behind. Only the promise traveled with them. And that was enough. God had not brought Abram to Canaan to settle him. He had brought him to teach him how to wait. The land lay before Abram, real and tangible, yet just beyond his grasp. It was a living lesson that faith does not demand immediate reward, and obedience does not require ownership. Abram would walk this land many times. He would never possess it, yet through him it would become sacred ground. And so Abram remained, a man called into promise, standing on land not yet given, learning that the truest inheritance begins not with holding, but with trusting. Chapter 5. Famine and Fear. Faith is easiest when the path feels steady. It becomes heavier when the land itself begins to fail. The famine did not arrive with warning. It crept in quietly, season by season, as though the earth itself were withdrawing. The grass thinned. Streams slowed. Wells that once offered water freely now demanded effort and patience. The land Abram had been promised no longer provided. At first, he waited. He had learned to wait. He trusted that scarcity did not mean abandonment. Each morning, he walked the land, watching the sky, listening for rain that did not come. Each evening, he counted provisions and said little. But hunger is persuasive. The flocks grew restless. Servants whispered among themselves. Sarai's eyes lingered longer on diminishing stores. Abram felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Faith was no longer theoretical. It had mouths to feed. The promise had brought him to this land. The famine now pushed him from it. Egypt lay to the south, a land shaped by the Nile, where water returned predictably and crops followed dependable rhythms. It was not the land God had spoken of, but it was a place where survival was possible. Abram hesitated. Leaving Canaan, even temporarily, felt like retreat. He wondered if he was stepping outside obedience, if survival itself could become a form of disobedience. Yet God had not forbidden movement. He had not promised ease. Faith does not cancel wisdom. And so Abram turned toward Egypt. The journey south was marked by tension rather than hope. The land grew greener as they approached, but Abram's heart grew uneasy. Egypt was powerful, sophisticated. Its gods were many, its rulers absolute. This was not a place for the vulnerable. As they drew near, Abram's thoughts turned toward Sarai. Her beauty had never been hidden, but now it felt dangerous. In Egypt, power took what it desired. Abram imagined soldiers' eyes, officials' interest, consequences beyond his control. Fear took root, and fear speaks quickly. Abram turned to Sarai and spoke words shaped not by faith, but by self-preservation. He asked her to say she was his sister, not his wife. It was a half-truth, carefully chosen to protect himself. "I am afraid," Abram did not say aloud. But the fear was there. Sarai listened. She did not argue. She had followed Abram through uncertainty before. She understood that obedience to God did not make one immune to human weakness. They entered Egypt quietly. At first, things unfolded as Abram feared. Sarai was noticed. She was taken into Pharaoh's house. Abram was treated well because of her. Livestock increased. Wealth accumulated. Outwardly, it appeared successful. Inwardly, it was hollow. Abram had escaped hunger only to enter compromise. He had protected his life at the cost of truth. The promise felt distant now, obscured by fear and convenience. But God had not stopped watching. Plague struck Pharaoh's household, sharp, undeniable, disruptive. Egypt's gods did not prevent them. Egypt's power could not explain them away. Pharaoh summoned Abram, his voice filled with accusation and clarity. "What have you done to me?" Abram had no answer that justified him. Pharaoh returned Sarai untouched. He sent Abram away, not in punishment, but in dismissal. Egypt had provided survival, but it had not provided safety. They left Egypt heavier with possessions and heavier still with lesson. Fear had led Abram where faith had not. Yet God had intervened anyway. Abram returned to Canaan, to the places he had once built altars. He returned not triumphant, but humbled. The famine had passed. The land received him again, not as an owner, but as a learner. He returned to Bethel, to the place where he had first called on the name of the Lord. There, Abram did what he had not done in Egypt. He worshipped. Faith, Abram was learning, does not move in a straight line. It stumbles. It recovers. It is corrected not by perfection, but by persistence. God had not withdrawn the promise. But Abram now knew something he had not before. Trust is easy when there is enough. It is tested when fear offers a faster solution. And still, God remained. Chapter 6. Lot and the Parting of Ways. Abundance returned quietly. The land received Abram again, not with celebration, but with permission. Grass grew where it had not before. Water gathered in familiar places. The flocks recovered, and with them came a different kind of challenge, one that scarcity had kept hidden. Prosperity has its own weight. Abram's household had grown large. So had Lot's. Servants moved between tents with increasing urgency. Animals grazed closer to one another, their needs pressing against the limits of the land. What had once been manageable now required negotiation. Tension began not with Abram and Lot, but with those who served them. Arguments broke out over grazing rights. Voices rose where patience once lived. Wells became points of dispute. The land that had barely sustained them now struggled to hold them both. Abram watched it unfold with quiet concern. He had walked far to escape conflict shaped by fear and survival. He would not allow abundance to undo what faith had begun to build. The Canaanites and Perizzites still lived in the land. Strangers watched closely. A divided household would be vulnerable. Abram understood this not only as a leader, but as a man who had learned the cost of fear-driven decisions. So Abram spoke. He did not summon Lot with authority. He did not remind him of seniority or calling. He spoke as family. "Let there be no strife between you and me," Abram said, his voice steady, deliberate. "For we are kin." He looked out over the land, wide, varied, open with possibility. "Is not the whole land before you?" he continued. "If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Abram offered Lot the first choice. It was an act that made no sense by the standards of the world. Abram was older. Abram had received the promise. Abram had built the altars. Yet he placed the future of his living situation into the hands of another. Faith does not cling. Lot lifted his eyes. He looked toward the Jordan Valley, where water flowed generously and the land gleamed with life. It was well watered, fertile, rich, like the gardens of Egypt he remembered. The choice was clear. Lot chose abundance. He took what appeared best. He moved east, pitching his tents near the cities of the plain, near Sodom. The land welcomed him easily. It asked little in return. Abram watched Lot depart without protest. He did not argue. He did not bargain. He did not warn, not yet. He allowed Lot to choose freely, knowing that faith does not require control to remain secure. When Lot had gone, when the dust of separation had settled, the land grew quiet again. It was then that God spoke. "Lift up your eyes," God said to Abram, "and look from where you are." Abram looked north and south, east and west. "All the land that you see," God continued, "I will give to you and to your offspring forever." The promise expanded, not because Abram had claimed it, but because he had released his grip on it. "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth," God said. If anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Abram stood still, letting the words settle. Lot had chosen what was visible. Abram was given what was promised. God did not rebuke Abram for generosity. He confirmed him through it. Faith, once again, proved itself not through assertion, but through trust. Abram moved his tents to Hebron, settling near the great trees of Mamre. There, he built another altar, not in response to fear, not in reaction to conflict, but in quiet acknowledgement. God had seen. God had spoken. God had remained faithful, not because Abram had demanded it, but because Abram had believed it. The land still did not belong to him in any formal sense. He was still a traveler, still without borders or deeds. Yet something within him had settled. Peace. The separation from Lot was not an ending. It was a revealing. One path chosen by sight, one sustained by promise. And Abram continued forward, not with urgency, not with regret, but with the quiet confidence of a man learning that what God gives cannot be lost by generosity. Chapter 7. Kings at War. Peace rarely lasts forever. The land Abram had settled into, open, quiet, unclaimed, did not belong only to shepherds and travelers. Beneath its stillness lay old rivalries, ambitions carried by kings whose power was measured not in flocks, but in armies. War came suddenly, for kings from the east rose and marched westward, their forces disciplined, practiced, and relentless. They swept through the land like a tide, subduing cities, crushing resistance, asserting dominance over regions that had grown comfortable in uneasy freedom. 5 kings of the plain rose to meet them. The battle took place in the valley of Siddim, a place scarred by tar pits and broken ground. The clash was brief and decisive. The kings of the plain were defeated. Some fled, others fell. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were plundered, their wealth seized, their people taken captive. Among them was Lot. The news reached Abram quietly, carried by a man who had escaped with his life. Dust still clung to his clothes as he spoke. His voice trembled, not from exhaustion alone, but from fear. Lot had been taken. Abram listened without interruption. He did not ask for details that would change nothing. He did not curse Lot's choice or question God's fairness. He felt the weight of kinship press heavily against his chest. Lot had chosen his path, but he was still family. Abram faced a decision shaped not by promise, but by danger. He was not a king. He commanded no army. He was a herdsman, a traveler, a man whose strength lay in obedience rather than conquest. Yet faith does not excuse indifference. Abram gathered those born in his household, 318 men trained not for glory, but for loyalty. They were not soldiers of renown. They were servants, shepherds, men who trusted Abram enough to follow him into uncertainty. The pursuit was swift and quiet. Abram did not announce himself. He did not seek recognition. He waited for night, dividing his men, striking with precision rather than force. The kings who had conquered cities were unprepared for resistance, born of resolve. The battle was brief. The captives were freed. The stolen goods recovered. Lot was brought back alive, shaken, but unharmed. Abram pursued the invaders as far as Hobah, north of Damascus, ensuring they would not return. Victory came without celebration. Abram returned as he had gone, without banners, without claim, without demand. The king of Sodom came out to meet him, his city broken, his power diminished. He offered Abram wealth in exchange for the people, an offer shaped by gratitude and self-interest alike. Abram refused. "I have lifted my hand to the Lord," Abram said, "the Most High, creator of heaven and earth." He would not take even a thread, even a sandal strap. He would not allow his prosperity to be attributed to conquest or compromise. What God had promised, God would provide. Only what was fair to his allies was accepted, nothing more. As Abram turned away from the king of Sodom, another figure approached, quiet, unexpected, unnamed by lineage or nation. Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High. He brought bread and wine, not tribute, not reward, but sustenance. He spoke a blessing that felt older than war itself. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High," he said, "creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram received the blessing in silence. He gave a tenth of everything, not as obligation, but as recognition. Victory had not come from strength alone. It had come from alignment. The moment passed quickly. Melchizedek disappeared from the story as quietly as he had entered it, leaving behind questions Abram would carry long after. That night, as the camp settled and silence returned, Abram felt the weight of what had happened. He had gone to war and returned unchanged in purpose. Power had been offered, and he had refused it. Wealth had been within reach, and he had let it go. Faith had not made him passive. It had made him brave without becoming cruel, strong without becoming proud. Abram lay beneath the stars once more, aware that obedience did not mean avoiding conflict, but choosing how to move through it. God had delivered Lot. God had guarded Abram's heart. And the journey of promise continued, not only through waiting, but through courage rightly held. Chapter 8. The Covenant of the Stars. The night was endless and quiet, yet full of presence. Abram sat outside his tent, the soft wind stirring the flaps gently, the air carrying the scent of dust and distant grazing flocks. The land stretched before him, wide and empty, and he felt the familiar weight of longing settle in his chest. Canaan was promised, yet he did not yet own it. The cities he had seen remained beyond his control. The flocks grew, yet mortality shadowed each new life. And still, God had not appeared in fire or thunder. Abram looked up at the sky. It was vast, larger than he had ever seen it before. Stars spilled across the heavens in countless numbers, each one a point of light so distant that it seemed impossible to measure. The night had no beginning, no end, only the infinite sweep of creation. He remembered the words God had spoken long ago. Asterisk, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. Asterisk. Abram's chest tightened. Dust could be counted, but the stars were eternal. Each one seemed to mock his patience, shining freely while he remained unsettled on the ground. Yet, in their brilliance, he felt a strange comfort, a promise visible, even if intangible. Sarai emerged from the tent quietly, her steps careful on the uneven earth. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she joined him, lifting her eyes to the sky as if searching for something beyond the night's glow. "There is more than we can see," she said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. Abram nodded. "I have heard the words," he replied. "I have walked by them, waited for them, feared them, but I cannot yet understand." Sarai placed a hand on his shoulder. Faith is never meant to be fully understood. The words settled between them, and Abram exhaled slowly. He rose, moving toward the open land beyond the tents. The flock slept quietly in the distance, unaware of the significance of the night. The tent's warm glow remained behind him, a small marker of home in the immense world around him. God had told him to look, and so he looked. He walked the perimeter of the campsite, counting nothing, measuring nothing, letting the land speak to him in its silence. The weight of responsibility pressed down, the lives he carried with him, the trust of those who followed, the promise yet unfulfilled. Abram knelt upon the ground, letting his hands rest on the cool earth. He felt the grains beneath his fingers, fine and countless, and understood them in a new way, tangible, yet humble, yet part of something far greater. And then God spoke. "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." The voice said, gentle yet unwavering, carrying authority without threat. "So shall your offspring be." Abram remained kneeling, unable to speak at first. The words wrapped around him like the wind, stirring the air and yet leaving no mark on the earth. Each star seemed to answer in silence, acknowledging the promise. "Walk before me," God continued, "and be blameless." The words were not a command shouted in judgment. They were an invitation to integrity, a call to alignment between the man and the promise. Abram felt the weight of obedience more keenly than ever. It was not obedience that demanded sacrifice of comfort. It was obedience that revealed the path to trust. He rose and lifted his eyes again, letting the night fill his vision completely. The stars stretched farther than his mind could follow, each one a witness to the covenant being made. Not with a temple, not with altars alone, but with him, a man standing on land not yet his, with hope pressed to his chest. God commanded a ritual, ancient and solemn. Abram gathered clean animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. He followed the instructions carefully, splitting some, laying others in place. He moved with deliberate care, as if each act were a prayer in itself. The sun set slowly, and darkness deepened. Fires from the camp flickered, casting long shadows across the plain. Abram's heart raced quietly with awe. He felt the presence of something vast, unseen, and immovable. Then, as night deepened, a deep sleep fell upon him. And in that sleep, visions came. A smoking firepot, a blazing torch, passing between the animals he had laid in ritual. The image was not threatening. It was not meant to terrify. It was a covenant, a visible symbol of a promise too vast for words. The land he stood upon, the sky above him, the generations yet unborn, all were included in the vision. When Abram awoke, the stars had shifted. The wind carried new scents. The world remained the same, and yet had changed. He walked to Sarai and said nothing at first, only taking her hand. Together they looked toward the horizon, toward the land that would one day belong to their descendants. Abram spoke then, quietly, reverently. Though we see nothing yet, we have been given everything. Sarai nodded, and we walk, step by step, as he directs. The night left them in silence, the stars continuing their eternal dance. Abram lingered under their light, letting the enormity of God's promise settle into his bones. He understood at last that faith was not measured in immediate possession, but in patience, obedience, and quiet expectation. The covenant was made. The stars had witnessed it. And Abram knew that the journey was far from over, yet it would be sustained, not by certainty, but by trust. Chapter 9. Hagar and Ishmael. The promise weighed on Abram's heart more heavily than he had expected. Years had passed. The land had been walked and rewalked. Altars had been built and blessed. Faith had been tested by famine, war, and separation. Yet Sarai remained without a child, and the promise of descendants loomed like a shadow too vast to grasp. Abram's nights were full of prayer, of quiet conversations with God beneath the stars, of wondering whether the words would ever be made flesh. Sarai, too, felt the ache of waiting. She had watched her husband, faithful and obedient, bear the burdens of land, people, and promise. And yet, her own body had not fulfilled what the promise seemed to demand. She wrestled silently with frustration, sorrow, and longing, walking beside Abram with a grace tempered by patience and pride. One day, Sarai spoke softly, but with a weight that demanded listening. "Perhaps," she said, "there is a way for the promise to be fulfilled through another." Abram looked at her, silent, unsure. He had known her suggestion might come, yet hearing it brought a new gravity. Sarai's plan was simple in words, complex in consequence. Hagar, her handmaid, would bear a child on her behalf. It was an ancient custom, an attempt to shape promise through human action. Abram nodded, though his heart felt uneasy. He loved Sarai and trusted her wisdom. Yet he could not shake the quiet fear that actions taken in haste, even for hope, could carry unforeseen pain. Hagar, young and untested, was soon brought into this delicate arrangement. She moved with caution, aware of the tension that hummed quietly between Sarai and Abram. She was obedient, yet not blind to the subtle currents of authority, expectation, and longing that swirled around her. The moment she conceived, Abram's household changed. There was joy, yes, but it was tempered by uncertainty. The child growing within Hagar was a living symbol of hope and also of complexity. Relationships shifted. Authority became more complicated. Feelings, unspoken but sharp, began to shape the daily rhythm of life. When Ishmael was born, the household rejoiced cautiously. Hagar held him, cradling the child whose laughter would one day echo through generations. Abram's eyes, often turned to the heavens, softened as he looked upon the boy. Yet he remembered God's promise, the one given under the stars at Mamre. Ishmael was a gift, but not the child of covenant. Abram could not ignore that truth, no matter how much he loved the boy before him. Time passed. Ishmael grew, and with him came the first glimmers of tension. Hagar's position shifted subtly, Sarai's patience was tested daily, and Abram carried the weight of all their hearts upon his own. The household became a place of careful navigation, of diplomacy, of quiet observation. Abram often walked alone, beneath the canopy of stars, thinking of the promise that had first drawn him from Ur. The covenant had been made. The vision had been shown. And yet, human hearts, his own, Sarai's, Hagar's, moved along paths he could not fully direct. Faith required endurance, not just for him, but for everyone bound to him by love, promise, or circumstance. One evening, Hagar approached Abram. She spoke not with accusation, but with honesty. "I see the weight you carry," she said, "and I see the love you bear for Sarai. And for me, I do not wish to disrupt what God has promised." Abram listened, his hands resting lightly on Ishmael's tiny shoulders. He understood her courage, the way she had chosen obedience without surrendering dignity. He felt the fragile threads of trust, respect, and humility that held the household together. God spoke again in quiet moments, not through fire or thunder, but in Abram's heart, whispering patience, promise, and provision. The child was loved. The covenant was secure. And yet, the path forward required discernment, kindness, and steadfastness. Abram taught Ishmael to walk with reverence, to observe the land and the heavens, to listen before he acted. Hagar nurtured him with care, balancing authority and compassion. Sarai observed, sometimes quietly conflicted, sometimes patient, always aware that the fulfillment of promise was not measured by immediate joy but by enduring faith. The household settled into a rhythm of daily life, awareness, and careful nurturing. Abram continued to walk under the stars at night, speaking to God in quiet tones, listening to the wind, to the animals, and to the subtle stirrings of the land. Ishmael grew, Hagar guided, and Sarai waited. And Abram understood, faith is a river, not a pond. Its flow cannot be commanded. Its currents may bring turbulence or calm. Its depth is revealed over time, in moments both small and vast. The covenant remained, stretched across generations, and he, the traveler, remained its humble steward. Chapter 10. The Covenant of Circumcision. The morning light crept softly over the horizon, painting the land in pale gold. Abram awoke before the sun, as he often did, feeling the quiet weight of a promise stretching across time. The stars had faded, yet their memory lingered in his heart. He had seen the covenant under their glow, and now he faced a new command, a test of obedience that required action as well as faith. God spoke again to Abram, not through visions this time, but with a word direct, clear, and unyielding. "You shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. Every male among you shall be circumcised. It shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you." Abram listened carefully. The words were simple, yet their weight pressed down on him. This was no symbolic gesture. It was a tangible act, a mark that would carry through generations, linking flesh and faith in a bond that neither time nor distance could erase. He rose from his tent slowly, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. Sarai emerged quietly behind him, observing, silent but aware. She had witnessed his journeys of trust, his obedience through famine, through battle, through separation. And now, she watched as the next step in the covenant unfolded, knowing it would bring both pain and promise. Abram called for the men of his household. His heart was steady, though it trembled slightly at the thought of the procedure. He spoke with care, explaining that this was a command from God, that it was a mark of faith, a connection to the promise that had been spoken under the stars. The men listened respectfully, some with apprehension, all with trust. When the moment came, Abram acted first. He felt the sharpness of obedience, the sting of flesh marking faith. Pain and reverence intertwined. He did not cry out. He did not falter. Every heartbeat reminded him that God's promise was alive in him, in the act itself, in the future it signified. Then the men of his household followed, fathers and sons, elders and the young men who had grown under his guidance. All took the step together. The air was heavy with quiet resolve, the murmurs of the men blending with the wind that stirred the tents. Pain and loyalty, fear and trust mingled in the silence. Abram looked at Ishmael, now older and growing in awareness. The boy understood little of the ceremony, yet he felt the solemnity, the gravity of something far larger than himself. Hagar held him gently, her hands steady, her eyes reflecting both care and the weight of the covenant. Abram thought of the generations to come. He imagined children, grandchildren, and those yet unborn, all carrying the mark of this covenant. It was a bond that transcended time, a tangible connection to the promise God had made, a reminder that faith required action, even when the reason remained unseen. When the morning sun rose fully over the horizon, casting long shadows across the plain, Abram felt the weight lift slightly. Not the weight of pain, but the weight of certainty. The covenant had been sealed in flesh as it had been in spirit. Every male in his household now bore the sign, and every heart present had been tested, refined, and aligned with obedience. Abram knelt in the dust, lifting his eyes to the heavens. The stars of the night were gone, yet he felt their presence, their testimony, their enduring promise. He whispered words of gratitude, of trust, of surrender. Sarai joined him briefly, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. Their bond strengthened through trials, through obedience, and through shared faith. The covenant was no longer a distant vision. It was real, embodied, and visible. It would live in every son born, in every household formed, in every future Abram could not yet see. It was a promise carried in flesh, witnessed by God, and marked for eternity. Abram walked among his people that day, moving slowly, deliberately, quietly. The pain of obedience had not broken him. It had made him more steadfast, more aware of the fragility and strength of trust. He understood, as never before, that faith required surrender, surrender of comfort, of certainty, of self. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the land, Abram felt a profound peace. The covenant of circumcision was not just an act. It was a continuation of the promise. A promise under the stars. A promise witnessed in battle, in famine, in separation, in family. A promise now marked in flesh. Faith had been made visible. Obedience had been tested. The covenant endured. And Abram, the traveler, the servant, the faithful one, remained a steward of what God had begun, a man walking forward with trust, courage, and the quiet strength of enduring promise. Chapter 11. A name written by God. Names carry weight. They are spoken before we understand them, carried before we choose them, and repeated until they become inseparable from who we believe ourselves to be. Abram had lived many decades inside his name. Exalted father, a title that had followed him through years of wandering, through promises spoken and not yet fulfilled. The irony had never left him. Each time his name was spoken, it echoed a future he could not yet see. The covenant had been sealed. The mark now lived in flesh, binding promise to obedience. Yet Abram sensed that God was not finished. Faith rarely ends where certainty begins. God spoke again, not from distance, not in vision, but with intimacy. "I am God Almighty," the voice said. "Walk before me, and be whole." Abram bowed low, his forehead touching the earth. He had learned that when God spoke this way, something foundational was about to shift. "You shall no longer be called Abram," God continued. "Your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations." The words settled slowly, like rain into dry ground. Not "you will be." "I have made you." Abraham felt something loosen inside him. His old name had carried longing. This new name carried certainty, not because the promise was complete, but because it was already established in the mind of God. Abraham, father of a multitude. The name did not change his age. It did not place a child in his arms. It did not shorten the road ahead, but it redefined the way he stood upon it. God spoke again, unfolding the promise with clarity and patience. "I will make you exceedingly fruitful. Nations will come from you. Kings will rise from your line. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your offspring after you." The land was named again, the future reaffirmed. But God did not stop with Abraham. "Sarai shall no longer be called Sarai," God said. "Her name shall be Sarah. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her." Abraham heard the words and laughed, not in disbelief born of contempt, but in astonishment shaped by years of waiting. He pressed his face into the dust, overwhelmed by the weight of what was being said. Sarah was old. Her body bore the quiet evidence of time and disappointment. The promise, once abstract, now pressed directly against reality. A son. From Sarah. Abraham's laughter trembled between wonder and fear. He dared to speak. "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing," he said. God's response was gentle but firm. "Ishmael will be blessed. I will make him fruitful. He will become a great nation." But then, unmistakably, "Sarah will bear you a son. You shall call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him." Laughter would be his name. Not mockery, not disbelief, but astonished joy. A reminder that promise sometimes arrives so late it feels impossible. When the voice withdrew, Abraham remained on the ground for a long time. The world had not changed outwardly, but everything within him had shifted. He rose slowly and returned to the camp. He spoke Sarah's new name aloud for the first time. "Sarah." She looked up, sensing the gravity in his voice. God had spoken her future into being, not as an extension of Abraham's promise, but as a bearer of covenant herself. She would not merely witness fulfillment. She would embody it. That night, Abraham lay awake beneath the stars, whispering his new name, letting it settle into his bones. He did not feel suddenly powerful. He felt humbled, redefined not by achievement, but by divine intention. Names, he realized, are not labels. They are declarations. God had named him not by what he had accomplished, but by what he would accomplish through him. And so Abraham rested, not in answers, not in timelines, but in identity rewritten by God himself. Chapter 12. The visitors at Mamre. The heat of the day lay heavy upon the land. Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent beneath the great trees of Mamre, where their broad branches offered shade and stillness. The air shimmered in the distance, and even the birds had grown quiet beneath the sun's weight. This was an hour for rest, for waiting, for silence. Sarah was inside the tent, moving slowly, attending to the simple rhythms of the household. Life had settled into a familiar pattern, faithful, patient, unremarkable on the surface. And yet Abraham felt it again, that subtle stirring in his spirit, the sense that something unseen was near. He lifted his eyes. 3 men stood not far from him. They had not approached with noise or announcement. They were simply there, as if the land itself had yielded them. Abraham rose at once, his heart alert, his body moving before his thoughts could fully form. Hospitality was not merely custom to him. It was reverence made visible. He ran to meet them, bowing low to the ground. "My lord," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." He offered water for their feet, shade beneath the trees, rest for their journey. His words were humble, but his urgency revealed something deeper, an instinct shaped by years of walking with God, a recognition that moments of grace often arrive unannounced. The visitors accepted. Abraham hurried into the tent and spoke to Sarah. "Quickly," he said gently but firmly, "prepare bread, fine flour, fresh." Sarah moved without question, though curiosity stirred within her. Abraham ran to the herd, choosing a tender calf, giving instructions with care. Servants moved swiftly, the camp briefly alive with purpose beneath the still sky. When the meal was ready, Abraham stood nearby as they ate. Milk, curds, and meat laid before them. He did not join them. He watched. He listened. The shade of the trees shifted slowly as the sun passed overhead. Then one of the visitors spoke. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" The question was simple, yet Abraham felt its weight immediately. "She is there," he replied, gesturing toward the tent. The voice continued, calm and assured. "I will surely return to you at this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah stood just inside the tent flap, listening. Her breath caught. A son. The words pressed against years of silence, disappointment, and quiet endurance. Her body had long since passed the age of childbearing. Hope, once fierce, had softened into acceptance. The promise felt distant, beautiful, but impossible. And so she laughed. Not aloud, not in mockery, but inwardly, a soft, startled laughter shaped by disbelief and longing. After all these years, after all this waiting, the voice spoke again, this time directed not toward the tent, but toward the heart. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? The words hung in the air like a still wind. Sarah felt seen, not exposed, but known. Her laughter had not gone unnoticed. Her doubts had not disqualified her. "I did not laugh," she said quietly, stepping forward, fear and wonder mingling in her voice. "Yes," the voice replied gently, "you did." There was no rebuke, only truth. The visitors rose to leave, turning their gaze toward the distant cities of the plain. Abraham walked with them for a time, the land stretching endlessly ahead. His heart felt full and unsettled all at once. Promise had moved closer, no longer abstract, no longer distant. It had entered his home, sat beneath his trees, spoken Sarah's name. When the visitors departed, the camp returned to its stillness. Yet nothing was the same. Sarah stood silently for a long while after they were gone, her hands resting against her side, her thoughts drifting between memory and possibility. Abraham watched her, understanding that something had awakened within her again, not certainty, but hope. That evening, as the stars returned to the sky, Abraham and Sarah sat together beneath their light. Neither spoke of doubt, neither demanded proof. They simply waited. For the first time in many years, waiting felt different, not empty, not heavy, but alive with quiet expectation. The promise had spoken again, and this time, it had spoken close enough to be heard in the heart. Chapter 13. The Cry of Sodom. The land grew quiet again after the visitors departed, but the silence was not empty. Abraham walked with them for a distance, his steps slow, his heart attentive. The plain stretched before them, vast and sunlit, the distant cities resting uneasily beneath the sky. There was a weight in the air, subtle, unresolved, as though the land itself carried a burden too heavy to remain hidden. The Lord lingered. Abraham sensed it before words were spoken. There are moments when presence alone carries meaning, when silence becomes an invitation. He stood respectfully, uncertain whether to speak, yet unable to turn away. Then the voice came, thoughtful, deliberate. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" Abraham's breath slowed. He did not yet know the matter, but he understood its seriousness. God continued, speaking not only of judgment, but of trust. Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation. All the nations of the earth shall be blessed through him. I have chosen him, that he may instruct his household to keep the way of the Lord, by doing what is right and just. The words settled deeply. Faith, Abraham realized, was not only about receiving promise. It was about carrying responsibility. Then the truth was spoken. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Their sin is very grievous. I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry that has come to me. The cities lay ahead, prosperous, fertile, alive with movement and wealth. Yet beneath their surface, a cry had risen, unseen but undeniable. Abraham's heart tightened. Lot, his nephew, lived there. Memories surfaced, of their journey together, of shared tents and flocks, of the peaceful parting when Lot had chosen the valley. Abraham had not regretted his generosity. But now, the weight of that decision pressed upon him. The Lord turned, preparing to go, and Abraham did something he had never done before. He stepped forward. The movement was small, almost hesitant, yet it marked a turning point. Faith that once listened now dared to speak. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham asked, his voice low but steady. The question was not accusation. It was reverence, shaped by courage. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then destroy the place and not spare it for the sake of the 50? Abraham's heart pounded. He had crossed a line, not of disobedience, but of intimacy. He spoke not as a servant pleading blindly, but as one who had come to know the heart of God. The answer came without anger. If I find 50 righteous in the city, the Lord said, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham exhaled, relief and wonder intertwining. But he did not stop. He hesitated, then spoke again, humility woven into every word. Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? If I find 45, came the reply, I will not destroy it. The pattern continued. 40, 30, 20. Each time Abraham spoke, he lowered himself further, aware of the ground upon which he stood. Each time God responded, patient and unwavering. Finally, Abraham whispered the last question, his voice barely carried by the wind. Suppose 10 are found there. The Lord answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. The conversation ended. The presence withdrew. Abraham remained standing alone on the hillside, the cities quiet in the distance, the sun now beginning its slow descent. He had never spoken so boldly. He had never felt so small or so trusted. He did not know what would happen next. He only knew this. Mercy had been weighed. Justice had been measured. And faith had been allowed to speak. That evening, Abraham returned to his camp. Sarah noticed the stillness in him, the depth of his gaze. You look as though you have been standing between heaven and earth, she said gently. Perhaps I have, Abraham replied. That night, he could not sleep. He lay beneath the stars once more, thinking not of land or descendants, but of righteousness, quiet, fragile, easily overlooked. He thought of Lot, of choices made long ago, of how close blessing and danger can stand side by side. Faith, he understood now, was not only obedience. It was intercession. It was standing in the space between judgment and mercy. It was trusting that God listens, not because we are worthy, but because he is just. The night deepened. The stars bore silent witness. And Abraham waited, not with certainty, but with hope shaped by compassion. Chapter 14. Fire from the Sky. Morning came quietly to the cities of the plain. The sun rose as it always had, casting light upon walls, streets, and rooftops that appeared unchanged. Merchants stirred. Doors opened. Life continued, unaware that its final hours had already been measured. In Abraham's camp, far from the cities, the air felt heavy. He rose early, his heart restless, his thoughts returning again and again to the conversation of the previous day. He had spoken. God had listened. Mercy had been weighed carefully, but judgment had not been withdrawn. Abraham walked to the place where he had stood before the Lord, the hill overlooking the valley. He gazed toward Sodom, its outlines softened by distance and morning haze. Somewhere within those walls lived Lot, his nephew, his kin, his responsibility once shared. Abraham waited. In Sodom, 2 messengers arrived as evening fell. They entered the city quietly, unnoticed by most. Lot saw them at the gate and rose at once, urgency stirring in him. Something about them felt different, authoritative, unsettling, holy. He insisted they stay in his home. Night fell quickly, and with it came unrest. Voices gathered outside Lot's door, heavy with threat and corruption. The city revealed what daylight had hidden. Violence pressed close. Mercy retreated. The messengers acted swiftly. "Gather everyone you have," they told Lot. "Anyone who belongs to you. Do not look back. Do not linger." Lot hesitated. The city had shaped him. Its streets were familiar. Its comforts had softened his resolve. Even now, with danger pressing in, he struggled to release what had once seemed prosperous. The messengers took his hand. They took his wife's hand. They took the hands of his daughters. And they led them out. Beyond the city walls, dawn began to glow faintly along the horizon. The air grew tense, charged with something unseen. The messengers spoke once more, their voices firm. "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you. Escape to the hills." They ran. Behind them, the city still slept. Then the sky changed. From the heavens came fire, not sudden, not chaotic, but deliberate. Judgment fell with a finality that words cannot fully contain. Flame and ruin consumed what had refused correction. Smoke rose thick and dark, blotting out the morning light. The land trembled. Lot and his daughters fled, terror driving their steps. But Lot's wife slowed. Whether from fear, grief, longing, or disbelief, she turned her head. For one final glance. She did not cry out. She did not run again. She became still, caught between what was leaving and what could not be reclaimed. The fire did not touch her. Memory did. She remained behind as a marker, not of cruelty, but of attachment too strong to release. A life half-turned, frozen in longing for what had already fallen. Lot reached the hills with his daughters. He collapsed there, breathless, shaken, alive. Below them, the valley burned, once fertile, now silent beneath smoke and ash. Far away, Abraham stood watching. He rose early that morning and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. The valley lay before him, altered beyond recognition. Smoke rose like the breath of the earth itself, thick and relentless. The cities were gone. Abraham did not rejoice. He did not question. He stood in silence, allowing grief and reverence to exist together. Mercy had been offered. Righteousness had been sought. The measure had been reached. He thought of Lot. He prayed quietly, trusting that God's justice had not abandoned compassion. The wind carried the scent of smoke even to Abraham's high ground. He turned away slowly, knowing that some moments are not meant to be understood, only honored. That evening, Abraham returned to his tent. Sarah saw the heaviness in his steps and did not press him for words. She poured water. She prepared food. She sat beside him in silence. Some losses do not need explanation. That night, Abraham lay beneath the stars again. They shone as they always had, unchanged, faithful, distant. Promise remained intact, untouched by fire or ruin. And Abraham understood something new. Faith does not shield us from sorrow. Obedience does not cancel grief. Righteousness does not mean absence of loss. But God remains just. God remains near. God remains faithful, even when the valley burns. The night deepened. The smoke thinned. And Abraham rested, not in answers, but in trust that the judge of all the earth does what is right. Chapter 15. The Son of Laughter. Time has a way of softening even the heaviest days. After the smoke cleared from the valley, life returned to its quieter rhythms. Abraham tended his flocks. Sarah oversaw the tents. Seasons passed, not marked by spectacle, but by steady repetition. Morning followed night. Stars returned faithfully to their places. The land healed where it could, and Sarah waited. She had learned how to wait well. Years had taught her patience, not the sharp kind that aches, but the quiet kind that settles deep into the bones. The promise spoken beneath the trees of Mamre no longer echoed with disbelief. It rested within her like a gentle ember, warm but restrained. Then, slowly, impossibly, her body changed. At first, she said nothing. She watched. She listened. She felt the subtle signs she had not felt in decades. Each breath carried wonder and fear in equal measure. When she finally spoke to Abraham, her voice trembled, not from doubt, but from awe. "I think," she whispered, "the Lord has remembered me." Abraham looked at her for a long time. He did not rush to speak. He had learned that some miracles require silence before celebration. When understanding reached him, he lowered his head and wept, not loudly, but with gratitude too deep for sound. The months that followed were unlike any they had known. Sarah moved more slowly now, her hands often resting against her side. Women of the camp watched her with quiet astonishment. Some whispered, some smiled, some simply observed, unsure how to name what they were witnessing. Abraham walked differently. His steps carried a lightness that had not been there before. At night, he no longer asked when. He only whispered thanks. And then the child came. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with breath and cry and life. Sarah held her son, tears streaming freely, laughter breaking through them like sunlight after rain. Abraham knelt beside her, his hands trembling as they touched the small, warm miracle placed between them. They named him Isaac. Laughter, not the laughter of disbelief, not the laughter of irony, but the laughter of fulfillment, the kind that comes only after long waiting. Sarah laughed openly now, her joy unrestrained. "God has made laughter for me," she said. "Everyone who hears will laugh with me." Abraham watched his son sleep beneath the open sky, the stars above bearing witness once more. He thought of Uar, of famine, of war, of covenant, of fire from the heavens. And here, in his old age, lay promise made flesh. Isaac grew slowly, gently, surrounded by care and quiet celebration. Abraham taught him the rhythms of the land. Sarah sang to him beneath the stars. Ishmael watched from nearby, older now, aware that something irrevocable had shifted. Love remained, but tension, unspoken and unavoidable, lingered at the edges. God's promise had been fulfilled, but fulfillment, Abraham would soon learn, does not end testing. Sometimes it begins it. For now, though, there was peace. Abraham sat outside his tent one evening, Isaac asleep in Sarah's arms. The fire burned low. The camp was quiet. The stars shimmered gently above. He did not speak. He did not question. He simply breathed, holding laughter, promise, and gratitude together in the stillness. The Lord had done what he had said, and Abraham rested in the joy of a promise kept. Chapter 16. The Child Who Must Leave. Joy does not erase complexity. Isaac's laughter filled the camp with a sound Abraham had once believed he would never hear. The boy grew strong and curious, his small hands always reaching, his eyes bright with discovery. Sarah watched him constantly, her heart both overflowing and vigilant, as though the miracle itself required guarding. But Ishmael was there too. He was no longer a child. Years had shaped him into a young man, quick in movement, sharp in observation, aware of his place and its slow unraveling. He watched Isaac with a mixture of affection, confusion, and something harder to name. He had once been the only son. Now he was the older one, standing just outside the center of promise. Abraham saw it all. He loved them both. He remembered Ishmael's first cries, the weight of him in his arms, the pride he had felt. He remembered teaching him to walk, to listen, to look at the stars. That love had not faded simply because Isaac had arrived. But the household had changed. During the feast celebrating Isaac's growth, Sarah noticed something, small, yet unmistakable. Ishmael laughed too, but his laughter carried an edge. Not cruelty, not malice, but awareness, a recognition of difference, of displacement. Something in Sarah hardened, not from bitterness, but from fierce protection. She turned to Abraham that evening, her voice steady but unyielding. "The son of this slave woman shall not share the inheritance with my son Isaac." The words struck Abraham like a blow. He turned away, unable to respond at once. The fire crackled softly between them. Isaac slept nearby. Ishmael stood at the edge of the camp, unaware that his future was being decided in whispers. Abraham did not sleep that night. He walked beneath the stars, every step heavy with memory. How could he send away his son? How could obedience demand such a cost? He had followed God across lands and years, but this felt different. This was flesh of his flesh, love of his life. God spoke before dawn. "Do not be distressed," the voice said, gentle but firm. "Listen to Sarah. Through Isaac shall your offspring be named. But I will also make a nation of Ishmael, for he is your offspring." The promise remained, but the pain did not disappear. Morning came quietly. Abraham prepared bread and water. His hands trembled as he placed them into Hagar's arms. She looked at him, her eyes searching, not angry, not accusing, only afraid. Ishmael stood beside her, taller now, trying to understand. Abraham could not trust his voice. He placed his hands on Ishmael's shoulders, holding him there longer than necessary, pressing memory into the moment. Then he stepped back. Hagar turned and walked into the wilderness. The desert was vast and unforgiving. The sun climbed quickly. The water ran out. Fear replaced endurance. When Ishmael collapsed beneath a bush, Hagar could not bear to watch him fade. She moved away and wept. But the wilderness heard her. God heard the voice of the boy. An angel called to Hagar, gentle and clear. Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying where he is. Her eyes were opened. A well stood nearby, clear, life-giving, present all along. Ishmael drank. He lived. He grew. God was with him in the wilderness, shaping him into something strong and enduring. He would not inherit the covenant, but he would inherit life, protection, and a future of his own. Far away, Abraham felt the ache of absence settle into his days. Isaac grew. Sarah smiled. Promise moved forward. But sometimes, beneath the stars, Abraham remembered another boy's laughter and trusted that God's faithfulness was wide enough to hold them both. Chapter 17. The Mountain of Trust. The command came without warning. There was no storm, no vision, no long explanation. Only a voice, clear, unmistakable, and devastating in its simplicity. Abraham. He answered as he always had. Here I am. Take your son, the voice said. Your only son, whom you love, Isaac. And go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. The words did not echo. They did not repeat. They remained. Abraham did not cry out. He did not argue. He did not fall to the ground. Something within him went very still. This was not like famine, not like war, not like waiting. This was the promise itself, placed back into his hands, and then asked for. Before dawn, Abraham rose. He did not wake Sarah. He saddled the donkey. He split the wood. His movements were steady, practiced, deliberate. Obedience had long ago become part of his body, even when his heart ached. Isaac stirred as the camp awakened. Where are we going? The boy asked, his voice soft with morning sleep. To worship, Abraham replied. They traveled for 3 days. 3 days of footsteps. 3 nights beneath the stars. Abraham walked ahead, Isaac beside him. The servants followed at a distance. No one spoke more than necessary. The land rose slowly as they approached the place God had named. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes. There, the mountain stood quiet and unremarkable, its slopes bare, its peak unadorned. No sign marked it as holy. No fire burned upon it. Abraham stopped. Stay here, he told the servants. The boy and I will go on. We will worship, and we will return. He placed the wood upon Isaac's shoulders. He took the fire and the knife in his own hands. Together, they climbed. The path was steep. The air thinned. The silence deepened. Isaac walked faithfully, bearing the wood without complaint. After a time, he spoke. My father. Yes, my son. We have the fire and the wood, Isaac said, looking around. But where is the lamb for the offering? Abraham's steps did not falter. God will provide for himself the lamb, he said. The words were true, though he did not yet know how. At the top, Abraham built the altar, stone by stone, slowly, carefully, as he had done many times before. He arranged the wood. Then he turned to Isaac. The boy did not struggle. He did not flee. He trusted. Abraham bound him gently, his hands trembling now despite his resolve. He laid his son upon the altar, the wood pressing against Isaac's back, the sky vast and silent above them both. Abraham lifted the knife. Time seemed to stop, not rushing forward, not falling away. The world held its breath. Then the voice came again. Abraham, Abraham, here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy, the voice said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham collapsed to his knees. The knife fell from his hand. He turned and saw it. A ram, caught by its horns in a thicket. Provision. Always provision. He untied Isaac with shaking hands, pulling him close, pressing his face into the boy's hair. breathing again for the first time since the journey began. They offered the ram in Isaac's place. Abraham named the place the Lord will provide. The mountain bore witness. The covenant was reaffirmed, not through blood, but through trust proven complete. That night, Abraham and Isaac descended the mountain together. They did not speak much. Some experiences are too deep for language. The stars shone above them, unchanged, faithful, eternal. And Abraham understood, more fully than ever before, that faith is not certainty. It is surrender. It is trusting God even when the promise itself is placed on the altar. And God, who had called him from who had led him through famine and fire, had remained faithful, even on the mountain. Chapter 18. After the mountain. Life did not rush back all at once. After the descent from the mountain, Abraham and Isaac returned to the camp quietly, as though the world itself needed time to settle. The flocks grazed as they always had. The tents stood where they had stood before. The stars returned to their places each night without comment. But Abraham was not the same. He moved more slowly now, not from weakness, but from awareness. Something within him had been stretched and reshaped on the mountain. Faith refined beyond fear, obedience tempered by intimacy. Isaac stayed close to him in the days that followed. Sometimes they spoke. Often they did not. There were moments when their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Trust deepened, love steadied, life affirmed. Sarah noticed the change. She sensed it in the quiet between them, in the way Abraham lingered longer beside Isaac, in the tenderness that had grown sharper through near loss. She did not ask for details. Some truths are carried best without words. Time passed. Then, one evening, Sarah grew tired. Not the weariness of a long day, but the deep, settling tiredness of a life nearing its rest. She lay down and did not rise again. Her breath slowed, softened, and finally ceased. Sarah had lived 127 years. Abraham sat beside her long after the camp had grown still. The woman who had walked with him from who had waited with him through decades of silence, who had laughed at impossibility and then held it in her arms, she was gone. He wept, not with despair, but with love unguarded. When morning came, Abraham rose and went to the people of the land. "I am a foreigner and a sojourner among you," he said. "Sell me a burial place, that I may bury my dead." They honored him. They offered land freely. But Abraham insisted on paying. This place, this resting place, would be his by covenant, by dignity, by intention. He purchased the cave of Machpelah. There, beneath the trees, Abraham laid Sarah to rest. The promise had not ended, but a chapter had closed. In the days that followed, Abraham returned to the rhythms of life. Quiet meals, shared stories, long walks beneath the sky. Isaac grew stronger, wiser. The future stretched before him now, less uncertain, more defined. Abraham watched his son and felt gratitude deeper than words. He had not lost him. He had not lost the promise. And though he had lost Sarah, her laughter lingered, in Isaac's voice, in memory, in the faith they had shared. That night, Abraham stood beneath the stars one last time with the same wondering gaze he had carried for decades. They were unchanged, faithful, countless. He no longer asked what would come next. He trusted, and the God who had led him from the beginning remained near, quietly guiding the final steps of a long and faithful journey. Chapter 19. A promise passed forward. Abraham was old now, not simply in years, but in fulfillment. His days were quieter, his steps measured, his gaze thoughtful. The promise that had once carried him across deserts and into the unknown now rested securely in his heart. Isaac was grown. Abraham knew his own journey was nearing its final stretch, and with that knowledge came urgency, not fear, but responsibility. The promise was never meant to end with him. It must continue through Isaac, shaped by wisdom and guarded by intention. One morning, Abraham called his oldest servant, the one who had walked beside him for years, who knew his household and his heart. "I am nearing the end of my days," Abraham said. "Swear to me that you will not take a wife for my son from the people among whom we live. Go instead to my homeland, to my family, and find a wife for Isaac." The servant listened carefully. "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me?" he asked. Abraham's voice was steady. "The Lord, who brought me out of my father's house and spoke to me with promise, will send his angel before you. You shall take a wife for my son from there." The servant swore the oath, and he departed. He traveled far, retracing paths Abraham had once walked in obedience. When he reached the city of Nahor, he stopped by a well as evening approached, the hour when women came to draw water. There, he prayed, not loudly, not publicly, but with humility. "Lord, show kindness to my master Abraham. Let the woman who offers water to me and to my camels be the one you have chosen." Before the prayer had fully formed in his heart, she appeared. Rebekah. She approached the well with grace and strength, her movements unhurried, her eyes kind. When the servant asked for a drink, she did not hesitate. "Drink," she said, "and I will draw water for your camels also." The sign was clear. The servant watched in wonder as she worked, her generosity effortless, her spirit open. When she finished, he knew. He told her the story of Abraham, of Isaac, of the God who guides with faithfulness. She listened without fear. When asked if she would go, her answer was simple. "I will go." Far away, Isaac walked in the fields at dusk. He was quiet by nature, reflective, shaped by both promise and memory. As the sun lowered, he lifted his eyes and saw the caravan approaching. Rebekah saw him too. When she learned who he was, she covered herself and waited. The servant recounted everything: the journey, the prayer, the answer. Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and he loved her. In her presence, comfort returned. The emptiness left by Sarah's death softened. Life continued, not as repetition, but as renewal. Abraham watched it all from a distance. He did not interfere. He did not direct. He trusted. The promise had moved forward, not through force, but through faith, humility, and willingness. That night, Abraham slept peacefully. He had done what was required of him. The future was no longer only in his hands. It lived in his son, in a new household, in a story that would continue long after his own breath faded. Chapter 20. The Last Blessing. The days grew shorter for Abraham, though the sun still rose with familiar faithfulness. He felt no fear in the passing of time, only awareness. Life had taught him how to wait, how to walk, how to trust. Now it taught him how to rest. His tents remained filled with movement. Servants worked. Flocks grazed. Laughter still surfaced in the evenings. But Abraham spent more time seated beneath the open sky, watching, listening, remembering. He called Isaac to him often. They spoke of practical things: land, flocks, paths through the hills. But beneath the words lived something deeper: inheritance not of wealth, but of faith. Abraham did not instruct Isaac with commands. He shared with him the story, again and again, of the call, the promise, the long road shaped by obedience. "Trust the voice," Abraham would say quietly, "even when it leads you where you do not expect." Isaac listened. Abraham also gathered his other sons. He blessed them, giving them gifts and sending them eastward, ensuring that each would have a future, a place, a purpose. There was no resentment in this division, only clarity. The covenant would pass through Isaac, but God's care would reach beyond him. When Abraham prayed now, his prayers were no longer requests. They were gratitude. He remembered the night sky in Uar, the hunger in Egypt, the laughter in Sarah's tent, the silence on the mountain. Each moment had shaped him. One evening, as the sun settled into amber light, Abraham felt the nearness of completion. He lay down, not in weakness, but in fullness. His breath slowed. His body, long carried by promise, found rest. Abraham died in peace. At a good old age, full of years. Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury him in the cave of Machpelah, beside Sarah. The brothers stood in shared silence, bound not by inheritance, but by memory. Whatever distance had once divided them softened in that moment. Afterward, life continued. Isaac lived in the land Abraham had walked in hope, but never possessed fully. God blessed him. The promise endured, not as a relic of the past, but as a living path forward. Abraham's story did not end. It widened. It moved into generations, into nations, into countless lives shaped by a single act of trust, by one man who listened, who walked, who believed. And beneath the same stars that once guided his steps, the covenant remained.
May the quiet faith that guided Abraham Now settle softly within you. May you remember that journeys begin not with certainty, but with trust. May you find courage to listen when the path ahead is unclear, and peace to walk forward, one step at a time. May the long nights teach you patience, the waiting teach you hope, and the silence remind you that you are never alone. As Abraham rested beneath the stars, so may you rest now, held by promise, surrounded by peace, and guided by a faith that endures. Go gently, rest deeply, and may the path before you be blessed.